All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome to hopefully seeing us every other week for our community groups. We're gonna try our best to, or I guess I'll take a step back. We're gonna focus on this season spiritual disciplines and practices. I think it's something that Jay and I have both been thinking about, even early summer or even early last year. But before we get into the nitty gritty details, I can ask you, Jay, why did we choose spiritual disciplines this season, and what's the importance for community groups to practice them?
Yeah, I think the reason why, both me and you, we've been talking a lot about spiritual disciplines is, I think especially in the culture of the Bay Area, we are such a achievement-oriented culture, and we're always kind of trying to optimize and maximize anything that we do, right? Whether it's our work or whether it's working out or whether it's even just our recreation. And I realize that maybe myself included, that many Christians see spiritual disciplines as kind of like a check mark or something to, you know, like a to-do list to accomplish, and that oftentimes we are trying to maximize and optimize our spiritual discipline. So it's kind of like, how can we do it in the most efficient way possible? What can we do to get the most out of it? And in that way, I think we've kind of veered away from what the purpose of spiritual disciplines is. It's really just kind of a an opportunity for us to slow down and be in the presence of God and to actually have a relationship with Him as opposed to just another achievement or a task to be completed. So I thought it would be good for us to kind of really dive in and think about what is spiritual disciplines and what are some practical ways that we can really develop a kind of a rule of life or a method in which we can kind of participate with God in these spiritual acts.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I would just the only things I would build on is I think, like Jay said, some of us might use them just to feel holy about ourselves, but I think it's two camps. Like either you're churched, so it almost brings up some trauma when you think about disciplines in whatever form or past you have. But if you're new to the faith, it's also weirder disciplines that you don't really understand why we're doing certain things. Why do we even sing in worship? Why do we pray? So we're hoping just to break it down to the core and get back to the basics. I think we'll introduce some old ones. I think we'll also introduce some quote unquote newer ones to our congregation that maybe you're not used to. So really excited to do that. Before we get into kind of this current practice we're going to practice, which is silence and solitude, I guess the format is we're going to try and release like a video and PDF every other week. So in that way, 1 week as a community group, you can gather. You either watch this video beforehand or all together, discuss it, take a week to practice that discipline, use the second week to be like, well, how was that individually? And then the third week, we'll restart, we'll do a new discipline. We're hoping to do that kind of every other week. But this week, we wanted to start with, I think, a discipline that is, even if you're a church, you might not even see as a discipline, which is silence and solitude. Now, if you're serving in any of our Sunday capacities, you'll know that this is a heavy emphasis recently that Jay and I both have kind of been instilling into our Sunday behind the scenes kind of show before we start worship. But just to take a big step back, first question I'll ask you, Jay, is why is it a discipline to be silent, and why does it matter?
Well, number one, I think it's something that is commanded in Scripture. So an easy place for us to see that is Psalm 46:10, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God." I mean, it's a famous passage. It's something probably that you've heard before, maybe even for myself or Eugene. So it's commanded. We see all throughout the narratives of both the Old Testament and the New Testament, where biblical characters they really uh, mature, they benefit, they're blessed, they're kind of grown in times of silence and solitude.
Hmm.
So you see before any kind of major ministry achievement or ministry calling, that many times God calls these biblical characters into the wilderness, into the desert. We see it in the life of even Jesus, that before he does anything, he is called into the desert and he fasts for 40 days and he's in silence and solitude, just meditating upon the word and prayer. And I think this is something that we have really been taken away from, just even just as a culture, not even just a spiritual church or spiritual culture, but just as people in general, where we are constantly in need of distraction and constantly in need of motion. We're almost like sharks, where I don't know if that's true. I remember hearing as a kid, like, oh, sharks have to always swim or else they suffocate and die. I don't know if that's
Yeah.
actually true. I think they do stop and sleep. But yeah, I think we're kind of caught in that whirlwind where we're constantly in motion and constantly doing, constantly achieving. So yeah, this is, I think, something very pertinent to us.
Yeah, and as Jay mentioned, like we're always in perpetual motion, and I think like I quote this a lot, but N.T. Wright, who's a pastor, he says you have to slow down to catch up to God, and I think so many of these practices is trying to instill that, and even to give more biblical support, as Jay mentioned, if you go to the Psalms, I think the Psalm mentioned that Jay mentioned is important, but even when you read it carefully, there's these words Selah, like I don't know how many times it is throughout Psalms, but even that Hebrew word is meant for a pause or a reflection, and that you're actually meant to read the Psalms with that, and without it, you're not really fully reading it. And I guess before we get into like what it is and why it's beneficial for our own souls, what isn't what is it not? Because I think for many of us, especially if I don't know if they might, some people might practice meditation, which I think is fine. There might be some differences that you want to kind of parse out too. So I guess before we get into the weeds, like what is it not in your mind before we dive into it?
Yeah, well, number one, this isn't a form of meditation. This isn't some sort of spiritual incantation. It's not um, a kind of a new age, new wave way of trying to control God or make him be on your side or to cause him to bless our hopes and our dreams. And this isn't, just another kind of spiritual thing that we're kind of jumping onto. This is, uh, a way for us to connect in the presence of God in a way that our souls in this time and culture have forgotten to do.
Yeah, I love that. And like as we practice these, I hope as Jay meant these aren't like secret portals to a deeper well of God's presence. I think silence in all these disciplines is just reminding yourself of God's presence amidst your busy lives. Um, I know you've been practicing a lot ever since your sabbatical, and I guess we can talk about what we read and theorize, but this isn't just like some people say stuff, but I've seen Jay practices on the daily. I guess for you, what has been the difference? Like when you look a year and a half back or 2 years back compared to how you were doing ministry and life compared to now, like now that you add silence into it?
Yeah, I mean, I can go on and on about this. I'll try to condense it to the best of my ability. So, I'll just give kind of like two main things that I've been really reflecting on. So one, the the discipline of slowing down, of being silent and still in the presence of God, has given me a better understanding of the pace at which God desires for me to live and the pace in which He has created me to live. So, I think I've mentioned this in past sermons before, but I was always trying to get as much done possible in the littlest amount of time possible. And so, I mean, I was cramming things in. I was filling my schedule. I was constantly on the move, and I thought that that was the way that I was glorifying God, and I thought that was the way that I would please Him. And I thought, in some ways, a sense of pride and accomplishment in thinking that, oh, I have a much higher bandwidth than others around me. Um, but because of the times of silence and solitude that I practice on a daily basis, God has used that to show me that I love that quote that that you use, right? Like you have to slow down to catch up to God. My constant movement wasn't me doing all these things for God. It was actually a way for me to distract myself and run from God. So the picture that I had in my mind by filling my schedules and not having any time to slow down was like thinking that I was like this workhorse and someone
Mm,
who was just constantly doing and working. But the reality was that I was actually like the little toddler, and parents may understand this, the little toddler that just got out of the bath and they need to be, wipe down and get ready for bed, but they're just running away and just kind of laughing and hysterical and not really letting their parents catch up to them. That was kind of my life, and that was the
mm,
realization that I had just through this practice of spiritual disciplines. And here's the thing, I didn't know or learn that until I actually started doing this practice.
mm,
So that's the first one. The second one was it's kind of related, but I really found my identity in my ability to achieve and my ability to do things. As an Enneagram 3, I think that's kind of like called the achiever or something like that.
yeah.
I love accomplishing things. I love getting things done. And what this time of silence is really helping me to remember is that every time I sit down and I'm still and I'm quiet, I'm reminding myself and also allowing the spirit to really remind me um, that despite doing anything, that I am a child of God,
Mm,
loved by Him,
mm-hmm,
and it kind of I always kind of reflect back on Jesus and how even before he healed anybody, even before he fed anybody miraculously, the heavens opened up and said, "This is my child,"
mm.
whom I love, and I think that's a great reminder through this discipline for me.
Yeah, when I hear you say that, like one reflection I have too, as I've been practicing this or trying to for the last couple of years, is I forgot who said this, so I don't know who I'm quoting from, but you're never more aware of God's presence other than when you're in silence and solitude, because you're not doing anything, and that's what grace really is. Like every other thing that you do, you can kind of hide yourself in all that, but silence and solitude really just exposes yourself to all you have is God's presence, and like you mentioned, like I realized I try and live so efficiently, which I think we should. Like, we're not saying you should be lazy or not try and make best use of your time. I think that's a different discussion. But, we're so used to, like, I always say, like 1.5 speed with even podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever it may be. But I think the beauty of silence and solitude is you can't do that. Like the practice itself is inefficient, and the longer you go, the more you get out of it. You cannot speed up that process, and that has been, yeah, like it sounds like a hyperbole, but like life changing, and really slowing you down. We're not promising that you're gonna radically change everything the minute you do this, but you're just more aware of who God is and how much you need Him as you practice this more.
Yeah.
So with that, I want to get very practical to kind of, bring this to a close. And we'll always try and do this. Like, I think a lot of things that we always either preach about or even kind of assign per se with the content or community groups can kind of be in the clouds. But Jay and I really want to get this as practical as possible. So I guess for you, Jay, like, this is a big question, so you can take it anywhere. Like, practically, what is the best advice you would give in practicing silence and solitude? Because it kind of sounds self-explanatory at first, but then you're like, once you start doing it, it's gonna get like, what do I do in the silence? What do I do when I am bored? What do I do when my mind is kind of wandering? I guess, like, where does your mind go when you hear all those questions and thoughts?
Yeah. N Number one, um, I would say that this is a discipline not meant to be done in the margins of your life, but that you really have to set aside a specific time to do it. So for me, where since my schedule is a lot more flexible, I don't start the day with silence and solitude, even though I think that would be a good practice. But I make sure that I start my day with silence, or I do my time of silence and solitude when I have a dedicated time to do so. So for me, I'm a parent, so mornings are pretty hectic. Wake up, got to get the kids breakfast, got to get them ready for school. So after that, I go work out, and then after I work out is when I start my time of like sermon preparations, emails, and all that. And the temptation that I always encounter every day, and this is literally like everyday encounter of temptation is, oh, like how quickly can I get through this time of silence and solitude so
Yeah.
that I can actually get into my real work?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, but I make sure that before I open up my laptop, before I take out any books or anything like that, um, I sit down at my desk at the office, or I sit down at a Starbucks or a cafe that I'm working at, um, and I just make sure that my posture is good, meaning I have my feet firmly planted on the ground. Uh, I make sure that my hands are open, or just kind of on my lap or on the desk, and that's really just again reminding myself that I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing this um, in a way like to say that I'm spiritually being transported into the presence of God. Uh, Hands open as a way of invitation that God like do with me whatever you desire at this time. I think there is sometimes we forget there's a passivity in our sanctification, and that there are things in which God and the Spirit works in us that we have no say in. And so, I invite the Spirit into that space and that time. I close my eyes just to be away from distraction. I'm very fidgety. I probably have undiagnosed ADHD like everyone else in the world, right? So whenever there's silence, like before when I first started, I was fidgeting all the time. I was like touching my face. I'm kind of like
Yeah.
doing this. I'm like cracking my knuckles. I'm kind of like stretching. Now I try to stay as still as possible. I breathe in through my nose. I breathe out through my nose. Um, and then I always have my Fitbit, and I set my timer uh, to whatever time that I'm gonna sit in stillness and silence.
Yeah.
Um, Now, when the actual stillness and silence begins, especially when you first start off, um, there is a moment of humiliation, knowing because you're confronted with the fact that you can't even do this one simple thing
Yeah.
without being distracted.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? It's impossible. Like you sit there, your mind is going to instantly wander. You sit there, and then you're gonna your spirit and your mind and your heart's gonna instantly think, oh, I need to fill this time with prayer, or I need to fill this time with my thoughts, or I need to think about what I need to get done for the rest of the day, or I need to think about how this time is gonna affect me, how is it gonna bless me, and that is not what this time is meant to be for. It's really a time when you're trying to really empty your thoughts and your mind and your heart of everything, and just sit in the presence of God, you know. And I know that can sound a little new agey and a little weird, but again, it's I do that because it's a reminder that even before I say a single word, even before I accomplish a single task, um, that God looks at me and he says, you are saved by me. You are my child. You have value, you have worth. And even if you didn't accomplish anything today, like my love for you will never change. And it's just, and again, I'm saying this not because I've completely figured it out. I don't think in this earth I'll ever be able to sit in complete stillness and silence without a thought in my mind
Yeah.
for more than like 20 seconds, right? But again, it's just trying to remind my soul what that truth really means.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's so good because I think the humiliation part is like a part of this practice. That a part of it is it's not you reaching Zen, but I think it's you becoming more aware of God's presence and His grace in your life, like through this whole process. Because it's gonna be messy. It's gonna be where your mind will definitely wander. One thing that I do, and and again, like everything we say, none of this is law. We're just trying to get practical tidbits. You can I view it as a buffet. Take what works and take what doesn't for you. But one thing that I do, because I know everything Jay described, I go through all the time. And one thing that's been helpful is like having like a centering prayer of sorts, just to kind of calm myself down before I go into silence. So the breathing thing is big for me. And, I realize like, I forgot what study it is, but we used to breathe correctly as human beings, but as modern life has progressed, even our breathing patterns are more messed up than before, which is like a meta dive. Okay, this sounds like a Joe Rogan podcast at this moment, but breathing through your nose and out with your mouth is the right way to breathe. That's just biologically correct. So what I always do is I'll breathe with my nose, and as I breathe with my nose for like, for the first, I'll just repeat this 5 times. I just repeat, Lord, I'm here, as I breathe in, and as I breathe out, I say, anchor me in your presence. And it's just to kind of remind me that I'm here, I'm in God's presence amidst the busyness that happens. I'm not saying that's it's like, oh, that now that your silence and solitude will be perfect. But it's helped me to kind of get myself practically present before God when I do this. I guess like for you, Jay, like I'll get very practical. How long do you do this for? Like silence and solitude right now?
Yeah, so right now I practice it at least twice a day. So once in the morning when I begin my work, and then in the afternoon after lunch. I start with 3 to 5 minutes of silence.
Hmm.
Then I do something called a prayer of examen afterwards. And then I end that time with about 3 to 5 minutes of silence. And I'll do that twice a day. Sometimes instead of the prayer of examen, I'll do it's called the day by day. There's like a
Mm-hmm.
devotional book that I do, so I'll do that as well. So overall, I'm doing it, about two separate times in one sitting, and then two separate times in the second sitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like if you're a parent, especially, and you're like, oh, what if my kids come in or bother me? And this is like to Jay's testament to like, so we had a staff meeting today on Zoom, just because we couldn't meet in person today, and then I think we were practicing. We always practice silence before we start our staff meetings, and I think Jacob walked in. I could be wrong, and I think Jay could have been like, put it on mute, turn around, and like, told Jacob, like, oh, hey, I'm in a meeting or whatever. But he just like stood there in silence, and that shows you guys I wasn't really paying attention when this happened. That's how distracted I was. But even that, I was like, oh, I think that's really cool. That even if you have children as a parent, you're probably like, dude, I have no time for this. Even fight for it to allow your kids to see it, because I think even in them, they remember these things, and it creates curiosity and even habits that they can kind of practice and form too. And I think that's something that Jay does, and the pair of examine is something that we'll go over our next session too. But like, do what works for you guys. Like, I think, in the PDF that's attached, I think I'll have more practical kind of advice, but maybe you can start with a car ride. It's not the idealist thing, but just make small gains. Maybe just saying like, oh, I'm going to, and even with time, I know Jay does 3 to 5 minutes. It's crazy because you don't think that's a lot of time, but once 10 seconds pass, it seems like an eternity if you haven't practiced this. You can start with 30 seconds. I don't think it's anything, there's no legalistic kind of limit where once you reach this limit, you're good in that. I guess like one last question, Jay, I want to ask practically is what do you try and do when your mind does wander? Like during these times when you start being like, oh, what am I doing? What's going on? What are practical things that you do to try to get yourself back into silence and solitude?
Yeah. Again, I love what you said. Don't worry about the time. I would even recommend start with 30 seconds.
Mm.
Even 30 seconds, you're gonna be like, what? This is taking
Yeah.
forever, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I love how you started, you're talking about the centering prayer.
Mm-hmm.
My centering prayer is, God, I'm here in your presence. So I try to repeat that when my mind wanders.
Mm.
But again, I'm also not legalistic and I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
There are times where I'll have like 3, 4 days where these silence and solitude moments are awesome. And there'll be times where it's like long stretches where I'm like, I know I did it, but I felt like I was just sitting there as I was letting my mind wander,
Yeah. Yeah.
So even those times when kind of the centering prayer doesn't really help me to kind of shut my mind off and be in God's presence, um, I am aware of it. And then afterwards, I try to think,
Mm.
why, and this is kind of the examination portion, right? I try to
Yep.
think, like, why am I so distracted? What was I actually thinking about? You know, what is that that's kind of like I don't know, pressing on my heart at the time. And I kind of offer up a short prayer to God. You know, I say, God, help me like reveal why I'm so anxious or why I'm so busy or I'm so hectic. And yeah, and I don't beat myself over it. I'm like, oh, well, then my silence also didn't count that. You know, I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
this is a different thing that God wants to reveal to me. You know.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think it's a reminder, and this will be a reminder with all these practices that we do. It's not a linear progression that you should expect. It's not like, oh, once you have this down, it's you're not going to ever lose it. No, it's just life is a roller coaster. So reminding yourself of that. And I love what Jay said. I think for many of you listening and in community groups right now, if you don't practice this regularly, your mind will definitely wander. And I think rather than beating yourself up with it, I think using this time of asking yourself, well, where did your mind wander to, and why do you think it wandered there? What feelings or emotions did come up when you were trying to be silent? Because it's pretty revealing what it does. If you feel bored, why do you feel bored? If you feel anxious, why do you feel anxious? And I think even that is God speaking to you in those times too. So don't ever feel like, oh, this is what I'm gonna get out of silence and solitude. I think even going into it with an open heart, an open mind, is kind of opening yourself to God's presence too. So very practically, what we expect is, or just sorry, what we advise and kind of hope you guys do is, this first week as you're watching this video, we'll have some discussion questions for the first week of like, well, what does it look like? We might even ask you guys in your community groups to practice it. Might feel weird, but it's always, I think, better done in community first than individually. And what we're going to ask you to do is for the next week, for the 7 days that you meet in between your community groups, to practice this every day. There'll be some suggestions on the PDF of what you can do, but just do something. Whether it's 30 seconds, whether it's Jay's format, maybe you have a Bible reading plan already and just kind of surround that with silence and solitude. Maybe you have a prayer schedule, surround that with silence and solitude. If you have a family, try doing it all together. It might be chaotic. It might be to you a waste of time, but just see what happens. It's truly like, I think, experimenting to get ourselves closer to God's presence is what we're hoping for out of these times. And then what we'll do is the second week, just you'll kind of discuss how did that go? What was easy? What was hard? What was helpful? What wasn't helpful? Where did your mind go to? Is there anything that you felt even God was speaking to you in those times? I think that will be very interesting. And then, yeah, we hope that this is something that you keep, and then we'll kind of keep stacking these disciplines. And I think most of these disciplines that we will introduce, they're not going to be these crazy, like, you got to devote X amount of time. There's small things you can really stack. And hopefully all these will kind of help you get closer to God's presence. So really excited for that. Jay, any closing thoughts or any closing things you want to let the CGs know as we close this?
Yeah, I have one final thought, and hopefully this is not going to add another like huge colossal thing to think about. But one real big benefit that I've experienced through silence and solitude is I forget which author. I've quoted him before in a sermon, and I've said this quote, but basically he says the soul is extremely shy, and I realized that in the pace of life that we were living in, that I really didn't have an opportunity to know who I am. And through these times of silence and solitude, God has really revealed not only a lot about himself, but he has really revealed a lot about myself. And I think that is only helping me better understand uh, how I can relate to the people around me and how
Mm,
I can relate to God.
mm.
And I think that's just a valuable benefit of this discipline when done with a heart of humility, um, with a desire to really pursue after God.
Yeah, I think that author is Parker Palmer, right?
Okay, that's right, Parker
Yeah,
Palmer.
something like
Yeah.
that. So he has really good stuff too. So yeah, like I love that. I hope this more than anything is revealing more than accomplishment or achievement, as Jay said, of how much you're in relationship with God and other people. So yeah, I'm super excited. If you guys have questions, like feel free to DM us. We're also going to ask CG leaders if you're watching this. If there are questions, let us know, and they can be completely anonymous. And then Jay and I, we're gonna record these every other week. We can start off every video with kind of answering any questions with the previous discipline, and then helping out wherever possible. And again, if you individually have a question, like you can always DM myself or Jay on Slack as well. So yeah, super excited to start this and kind of for the winter and maybe even spring season spilling over with our CGs. But hope this is helpful, and then good luck with your CGs.